Schaub grew to be well over 6 feet tall and surprisingly quickly found success in pursuits such as football and lacrosse while in high school, lettering twice in the former and 4 times in the latter, even being voted MVP in his senior year. Willie didn't attract the attention of any talent scouts. When he tried out for the football and lacrosse teams at Whittier College, he got accepted into both. Though he was majoring in sociology, it was just a placeholder degree while he focused on his prospects as a full-time football player. Once he was done with college, he ultimately never got drafted or signed, causing him to retire in 07. However, this didn't mean he'd given up on being an athlete. Far from it. After abandoning football, he picked up martial arts, in particular boxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Much like his previous forays into sports, he quickly got somewhere with it, winning the novice division heavyweight title in Colorado and becoming the training partner of Shane Carwin, a heavyweight contender in the UFC. With this connection, he transitioned seamlessly into being an MMA fighter. Once again, he started out extremely well, with 4 wins in a row, all in the first round. It was only after 3 exhibition matches in the Ultimate Fighter, which he won, that he experienced his first loss, followed by another 4 victories in a row, one of them against Mirko Cro Cop, one of the most respected fighters in the UFC, though already 36 years old by that point. Not only did Schaub win, but his win was ruled the knockout of the night. After this, however, his fighting career gradually slowed down until it halted completely in 2014 after his loss to Travis Brown by TKO. Initially, he planned to continue fighting indefinitely, but after his loss, Joe Rogan and Brian Callen essentially did an intervention live on a podcast to convince him to retire from MMA. While their conversation was long, a slightly edited version uploaded to YouTube netted over 5 million views. People were mostly taken aback by how brutally honest Joe was to Brendan. While Brendan took his UFC losses in perhaps more stride than he should have, no knockout was as devastating as having his 2 best friends walk him down conversationally and strip him of his ego in regard to the reality of the situation. In the bluntest terms possible, while still being sympathetic to him, Joe explained that Schaub was simply in way over his head when it came to fighting, and if he kept putting himself in the cage with elite fighters, he would continue to get knocked out and hurt until he suffered irreversible brain damage. Ultimately, it seemed that Schaub recognized that Joe was right, and that being a professional fighter was far too big a risk for a guy like him, who certainly had other ways of making money besides getting his head kicked in by people who were more proficient than him in MMA. Despite it obviously not being ideal that a conversation as sensitive as this was taking place in front of millions of people, both parties showed the kind of
I am not getting into hell. God damn.
To come by these days. Eventually,
use your old you
intervention, and when asked about why he brought it up in the middle of a podcast, Joe said that he wasn't planning to do it, but once the topic came up, he got genuinely emotional and did it out of a deep sense of concern for Schaub. Due to the nature of the situation, there was no way for Brendan to come out looking good. If he had gotten angry, he would have just been seen as delusional. But because he ended up agreeing with Joe, it just fanned the flames of a perception people already had of him, which was that he was Joe's yes man and went along with anything he said. Then again, people often say that Joe is the yes man that changes his opinions based on the guests, so at this point, this didn't get Schaub too much hate. If you exclusively take into account his career in fighting and his participation in podcasts, the most Schaub could be considered is annoying or not the best communicator. However, things changed drastically when he made a hard pivot to being a comedian. For starters, this move was considered poorly thought out since Brendan spent the majority of his life being an athlete in some capacity and had absolutely no experience or seemingly prior interest in being a comic. People were confused as to why he didn't become a coach or open up a gym, especially considering that Eddie Bravo, another frequent JRE guest, took that route with significant success. A year prior to his departure from the Octagon, Schaub had begun a podcast with fellow Joe Rogan collaborator Brian Callen called The Fighter and the Kid. Eventually, either because the podcast was good enough or because Schaub and Callen were sufficiently connected, the podcast was picked up by Fox. Most likely it's a combination of the two, since at the time, plenty of episodes were getting hundreds of thousands to even millions of views on YouTube. Many episodes featured comedians and other more established personalities, which certainly helped it become popular. In retrospect, the way Brendan came off on the show was much less obnoxious than what he'd become infamous for. Not only could you sympathize with him, you could also occasionally laugh at his exchanges with Brian. This was very impressive since this was someone who wasn't media trained, with no experience in the field he was getting into, and with a speech impediment, who was somehow doing well for himself in a medium that consisted entirely of being good at communication. He must have been doing something right. At least that's what people thought at the time. The problem was Brendan's relative success in this area started getting to his head very fast. While he's never been the most charismatic charismatic guy. Earlier on, he was likable, as the podcast relied mostly on the chemistry between him and Callan, whose conversations often sounded like two friends talking. But as the show grew, so did Brendan Schaub's ego, to astronomical proportions. Brendan is notorious for being someone who's easily suggestible, and in an interview he and Brian gave to the Dallas Observer, he reveals that Brian was the one that told him to start doing stand-up. He says, "We're having success with a podcast," and Brian said, "Hey man, we should do the show on the road and do a live show." I thought that sounded terrible. But his idea was not to take the podcast on the road, but to do a live comedy performance. He wanted me to open up and do stand-up. I said, "That's not my wheelhouse, I know my limitations." But he said I was looking at it wrong. He wanted me to start off by telling a story, and we added from there. For a guy who's competed his entire life in athletics, competed at the highest level in football and fighting, fought in front of 60,000 people and millions of people on pay-per-view, nothing beats these live shows. Can you imagine if Brendan listened to his gut instinct here and didn't get into stand-up? Within a year of this terrible lapse in judgment, Brendan had evidently developed illusions of grandeur about his talent as a communicator and performer. Instead of crediting the somewhat sudden success of the podcast and their live shows to the setup being good and the guests being interesting, he thought he was the reason they were working. In 2016, he started doing some stand-up shows as a solo act and started his own podcast, Big Brown Breakdown, a name he wisely changed to The Schaub Show. His podcast was well received, at least initially, because for once, he was talking about something he at least had some experience with, fighting. Over time, however, the show's ratings took a downturn as listeners noticed that the show was gradually moving away from being about fighting and towards being about Schaub. One of the reviews on iTunes puts it pretty succinctly: "I used to love this show. Schaub is trying to be a Hollywood star or something, and has changed a lot over the years. Dude, we don't care about name dropping or anything celebrity-like. We listen to your show because you are funny and down to earth. Get back to basics." It's actually pretty tragic to look at how raving the reviews for the Schaub Show used to be, and how much this unchecked ego destroyed his reputation with people who genuinely liked him. This issue wasn't exclusive to his podcast, much to the contrary. It polluted every facet of his public life. In The Fighter and the Kid, his tendency to recklessly interrupt guests and even his co-host Brian became increasingly prominent. As early as the show's departure from its affiliation with Fox in 2016, people were picking up on their deteriorating relationship, as Schaub would often ridicule Brian's opinions and frequently cut him off. Despite the fact that, even though we didn't have any of Brendan's hands-on experience with mixed martial arts, Brian frankly sounded more knowledgeable on it. Overall, Brendan just seemed like he was no longer trying to be likable whatsoever. In another venture of his, the Below the Belt series, which is simultaneously titled Food Truck Diaries and Fight Talk, because Brendan can't seem to settle on his name if his life depended on it, Brendan would frequently screw up the names of the fighters he was talking about. This was jarring, since part of the appeal of the show, which was greenlit by the TV network Showtime, was having someone with a background in the UFC talk about fighting. But throughout the entire thing, he consistently sounds like he has no idea what he's talking about. Regardless, because of the sheer caliber of the people Schaub managed to get on the show, many of the episodes were very successful on YouTube. As people had come to expect at this point, every time Brendan was successful with an endeavor, it just magnified all of his character flaws. Another of his behavior patterns that had become noticeable was his tendency to brag about his lifestyle and accomplishments, often resorting to exaggerating and lying about them to make himself look good. While he had already been doing this for a long time, initially no one had any reason to suspect it, but as the public's opinion of him grew negative, people started to scrutinize his claims, only to find out he was basically a pathological liar. One of the best examples of this is his "This Is Not Happening" performance in 2019, where he goes over his career in the UFC. At the point this video came out, The Fighter and the Kid subreddit had already turned against Schaub and became exclusively dedicated to hate following and documenting his continuous downfall. Identifying as homeless cats and fried cooks at PM Chang's after a bizarre rant from Schaub about why he didn't care about what his haters thought, the members of the subreddit were rigorous in not letting Brendan get away with anything. As a result, the details of his story about his career in the UFC were closely examined, and it turns out he lied through the whole thing. He claimed his childhood dream was to be a mixed martial artist, when in a podcast appearance, he claimed it was to play in the NFL. He played up both his and his opponent's rank in the UFC, as well as lying about how many people were in attendance to make his fight sound more important. He name drops multiple big celebrities, saying they were at the fight, which literally none of them were. These are just a few of the lies in his individual video, because if you were to exhaustively go through the stuff he says in the podcast, he lies so often about topics so inane that it's impossible to document all of it. Sure, his "This Is Not Happening" appearance is a stand-up comedy routine, and comedians lie all the time to make their stories funnier. But the issue here is the fictional parts don't contribute to the comedy, they just contribute to Schaub's inflated perception of himself. And since we're on the topic of his comedy, his arrogance is also the culprit for the utter annihilation of any respectable career in stand-up he could have potentially had. Instead of putting putting
Fuck
a
yeah.
decade or even longer to scrape together 1 hour of material worthy of turning into a special. After
Oh,
just a couple of years calling himself a comedian, he released the You'd Be Surprised. It would go on to become the worst rated special of all time. Literally. It's a 1.5 out of 10 on IMDb. While the public was blissfully ignorant of just how incompetent a comic Brendan Schaub actually was until after the special came out, some of his friends saw this coming from a mile away. Joey Diaz, for example, despite holding out hope that Schaub would eventually develop into a legitimate comedian,
Arisa, dude, play Maui. He actually fucks him.
that were mentioned earlier. He compared it to the opposite situation. If a lifelong comic who happened to win a couple of amateur fights proceeded to call himself a professional fighter and put himself in the ring in front of thousands of people, it's only reasonable to expect that this person gets the beatdown of their life with a side of thorough humiliation. In a way, that's what Brendan got. What many people have pointed out was that it wasn't just a regular failure punch. It was a sign that Brendan didn't care about being a good comedian in the first place. All he wanted was a special with his name on it.
Fuck your doctor.
To whatever length necessary to get something out and earn that validation. But when the special was released and the negative reactions began flooding in, he couldn't accept the fact that it was getting panned. After all, he was a self-professed Renaissance man who could instantly excel at anything he tried. Instead of retreating and realizing that he'd gotten way ahead of himself by releasing a special with just a few years of experience under his belt as a mature person would do, he decided to falsely copyright strike any YouTube video that dared to disturb his debut as a professional comedian. If only someone had informed him of the Streisand effect before he made his attempt at silencing his critics, he could have saved himself from the following years of continued criticism. One particular YouTuber by the name of Beige Frequency made a video called Brendan Schaub's You'd Be Surprised is the worst comedy special I've ever seen, which, as you can imagine, isn't exactly kind to Schaub's magnum opus. Within 24 hours, I was taken down twice by Joe Rogan's Pixels, which made for another upload. For a moment there, Brendan had the opportunity to play the part of a for a special, which would not only be redeemable, but if he handled it right, could be a great place to start out as an underdog. I mean, Louis C.K. being exposed for being a pervert with a leaked set that instantly became massive. But Brendan made the fatal mistake of adding insult to injury, letting everyone know he wasn't willing to yell. He wasn't just a bad comedian anymore, he was a bad person. And sooner or later, everyone will know. The thing about the internet is that events like this don't happen in a vacuum. Once things start moving in a certain direction, the tendency is to snowball, not slow down. I know looking up people's net worth online is a meme, but considering the type of gigs he gets and the lifestyle he lives, Brendan is most likely sitting on at least $1 or $2 million. My point being, he absolutely does not need to be concerned about what YouTubers are saying about it. By enabling them and stooping as low as false copyright striking people for being mean to him, he was inviting the attention of people to whom stooping low becomes second nature. Because the takedown was done manually, the people criticizing Schaub not only knew that he was looking himself up to see what everyone was saying about him, but he was really upset about it too. Perhaps because of the steep decline in chemistry between him and Brian Callen, Brendan sensed that the fighter and the kid had his days of success counted and decided to start yet another podcast, this time with Chris D'Elia, Eric Griffin, and Theo Vaughn, which was initially called The King and the Sting, then The King and the Sting and Wing, and finally The Golden Hour, because everything Schaub does is contractually obliged to be poorly executed and require changes on the fly. While he made a wise decision in not putting all of his eggs in the same basket as Callen, since in 2020, Callen was accused of sexual misconduct by 4 women, Brendan wasn't wise enough to foresee Chris D'Elia also being the subject of scrutiny in regards to his alleged sexual harassment of minors. Man, what the hell is it about being a stand-up comedian that makes you a freak? Eventually, Theo Vaughn was smart enough to notice that his participation in the podcast was more about having his name attached to the project than it being a platform for him to be creative, and he left it. In 2021, Brendan launched his Thick Boy brand and YouTube channel, which amounts to little more than paying a team to make him look like an established celebrity YouTuber, only for the channel to eventually devolve into a platform for all of Schaub's already existent projects. Additionally, this channel, along with many other channels, leading and censoring comments, particularly the ones that get traction. Despite this attempt at yet another pivot to being a solo online personality, Brendan Schaub's success was entirely contingent on the people he somehow convinced to work with him. While the fighter and the kid's popularity had dwindled, the Golden Hour was still enjoying growth. But, like all things Schaub, it was immediately tainted by his inability to handle a spotlight. A couple of years prior, in 2019, Brendan and Theo, when they were the only members of the podcast, were answering questions sent in by listeners, and one of them was about if it was possible to be attractive while bald. Using about 5% of his magnanimous intellect, Brendan takes this as an opportunity to say that his longtime friend and spiritual stepfather, Joe Rogan, was, and I quote, slinging dick. That expression means one thing and one thing only, in the context of the conversation. There was no way Schaub meant something else with it. The problem is, Joe Rogan has a wife, which meant Brendan was essentially revealing Joe was cheating on her, or at least claiming he was. Later on, when the topic got brought up, he tried to claim that what he meant was that Joe was killing it in life, and you can guess how well that excuse works. That attempt at a save was so bad that, even though it had already been clipped, they actually cut that part out of the original episode, which only served to make things look even worse. The topic of infidelity eventually came back with a vengeance, but directed at none other than Schaub himself. At the beginning of 2022, on the 49th episode of the Trash Tuesday podcast, fellow comedian Andy Letterman began talking about a certain other comedian whom she claimed sucked at comedy, who, despite having a wife and kids, decided to suggestively invite her to walk him to his truck, an offer Andy rejected. As soon as the story was told, another of the show's hosts, Kalila Kuhn, immediately deduced who Andy was talking about and said that he had also tried to get with her. Eventually, they said that his initials were BS, which pretty much confirmed they were talking about Brendan. This became a big controversy when the always vigilant Fighter in the Kids subreddit capitalized on it immediately, picking it up and running, as well as turning it into a meme and making a variety of songs revolving around the phrase, "Walled me to my drug." While the topic wasn't broached in his appearances to Joe Rogan or the Impulsive podcast, when Schaub went on Andrew Schultz's Flavor 2, he got grilled on it in a pretty masterful way. Despite asking Brendan about one of the most damning and revealing things possible, Andrew remained aloof as if it wasn't some potentially life-destroying piece of information for Schaub. Meanwhile, Schaub handled it like you would expect, stuttering while trying to explain himself like a kid that got caught pissing in the sink, which, if you don't know, is also an actual real habit of Brendan Schaub and the entire Turkey Tom team. Underlining this situation was other corroborating factors unearthed by the subreddit, such as a video of Brendan Schaub passing a note to a woman, which was presumed to be his number.
God damn it!
The clip was used in the video by a small YouTuber called Uniqueness. Not only were his videos about Brendan Schaub taken down for false copyright claims, but Brendan actually went the distance and
I'll do that.
When trying to defend this insane and narcissistic decision, Brendan said, "If you want to criticize my fight picks, my stand-up, my podcast, that's what I'm a public figure for. I signed up for that. That stuff does not bother me. But when you start slandering my name, stealing content, and creating this false narrative of cheating on my wife, and do all this crazy defamatory stuff, and using my content and the clickbait stuff like that for years, well then you're not playing the same game, man. Then I have to do something. If you made your entire career off defamation, I have to do something." Several times I've had my team reach out and go, "We don't want to pursue this, just stop." And he wouldn't. So what do? So this narrative and that, oh, this bigger YouTuber, this other YouTuber for no reason to silence him. You know, I thought you didn't get down with cancel culture. In any facet. This is different. It's different insofar as it affects him personally. The allegations that Schaub was a serial cheater were further substantiated by a series of screenshots from multiple different women, all shown being contacted or knowing someone who Schaub contacted, some of them even fresh out of high school. I think for something to be considered defamation, it would have to be false information, so I'm pretty sure that Unique was in the clear there. To help pay for the legal costs of dealing with Schaub, Unique opened a GoFundMe page. Despite it failing to raise the amount of money set as the goal, Brendan lost the lawsuit anyway, along with a whopping $500,000. He also appears to have threatened to serve the Trash Tuesday crew with a lawsuit for daring to tell an anecdote of a guy cheating on his wife, which everyone immediately recognized must have been him, without them even having to say his name. Through a series of increasingly convoluted girl hallucinations, some courtesy of Brian Callen, no less, Brendan's beef with Trash Tuesday turned into
God damn it! Help me, damn it!
We're running the Fighter in the Kids subreddit. In May 2022, Brendan and Brian called Kalila and Bobby to berate them for being responsible for all of the hate Brendan gets online. Because there's no way he could have attracted all that hate himself, right? It must have been a conspiracy. During this call, Brendan claims to have 300 pages of evidence that Bobby and Kalila were behind it all. Just 2 weeks later, he appeared on the Tiger Belly podcast, which ran for an hour and 20 minutes, mostly consisting of Kalila and Brendan going back and forth unproductively, while Bobby just appeared to be shocked to be in this situation. In the episode of Trash Tuesday that came out to address this drama, Kalila specified that the only evidence ever provided to her and Bobby by Shaw was a zoomed-in screenshot of HTML code that had the Tiger Belly email randomly put in the middle of the code. Now, I wish I could explain to you what that means or why that convinced Brendan, but for once, there's no plausible explanation as to what happened. I don't fucking know. It could have been that Brendan was looking for a justification to attack Kalila for exposing him on Trash Tuesday, since he couldn't just do it straightforwardly, as it would have been an implied admission of the Shrug Log incident. It could have also been that he wanted to go on subreddit and needed a pretext besides that the posts on it were hurting his fee-fees. In either case, though, outright stupid enough to just put their emails into the subreddit's inspect element, screenshot it, and save that as evidence. As we've come to learn, Brendan is a moron, but is he that
No kneeling, shut up.
If he is that stupid, what
Yes!
do inspect element? Did he get help from someone? There are a lot of unanswerable questions here. The bottom line was that when he was the target of substantiated accusations of wrongdoing, Brendan decided to make a bunch of unsubstantiated accusations.
Getting Chris Brown in this shit. I mean, Rihanna.
It was Bobby Lee, who is a comedian and is also well liked by other comedians with a loyal following. Meaning Brendan wasn't just making himself look dumb to random strangers, he was burning bridges in the business that he supposedly cared about. One of the more impactful signs that Brendan's credit with the comedy world was drying up fast was that it seemed that Joe Rogan was becoming more comfortable with putting him in a negative light. During a discussion on his podcast, the topic of Brendan Schaub's conspiracy theory about the UFC purposely having one of their fighters not make weight so that they could change the card was brought up. And Joe said that it was ridiculous, in evidence that Schaub needed a handler to keep him from saying absurd things. A pretty common Rogan W. In response, Schaub essentially went, "No you," while visibly so upset he was almost crying. "I don't need a handler. These guys need a handler." All this controversy is undermined by Schaub's second comedy special, The Gringo Poppy, which somehow managed to outdo his predecessor and underperform even further, getting a mesmerizing 1.1 rating on IMDb. Much like his previous special, the poor reception was quickly followed by a string of false copyright takedowns. Not only were many comedians turning on him, but the MMA world was beginning to turn its back on Brendan as well. Ariel Helwani and Dana White, just to name a couple, had already noticed how Schaub's relationship with fighters and MMA culture was parasitic.
Oh, now they got a mercy. Now they got a mercy.
Disfigured beyond the hope of repair. He couldn't even sell tickets anymore. Consequently, the streams of income were shutting down. Because of this, Brendan ended up firing Mark Harley from his crew, and Harley promptly exposed Brendan for a myriad of things that he read at AMA. Among the many things he addressed in the post, Mark claimed that Shaw was indeed a pathological liar who chronically overplayed the size of his social media presence, going as far as view-botting his special on YouTube to the tune of hundreds of thousands, as well as buying followers on Twitter and Instagram. Mark also gave significant backing to Schaub's cheating. Since he was the person responsible for managing Schaub's business, he got annoyed at how often Schaub basically asked him if there were any baddies hitting him up in the DMs, and even provided receipts for it. As much as it sucks that this horror show will continue to go on indefinitely, since none of Schaub's sufficient enough to have it go away, I have to say, there's so much unintentional humor that's just oozing from this whole phenomenon. It's actually impressive.
That's fun. Season 1 went to Asia forever, and then Season 2 went to Europe, Africa, and, you went to Africa? Well, just for one location. We were
on it. It's actually impressive.
That's fun. Season 1 went to Asia forever, and then Season 2 went to Europe, Africa, and, you went to Africa? Well, just for one location. We were in, Morocco. Jesus Christ. People say Africa like it's a country. I do it too all the time. Africa is a country. That's a big continent.
But moving on, depending on how much of his
much for one location. We were in
That's his name. It's a continent.
Jesus Christ, dude. We say Africa like it's a country. I do it too all the time. Africa is a country. That's a big continent.
It's a continent.
But moving on, depending on
if people do talk to it like it's a country, it's very weird. Even I'm with them. Even I talk to it like it's a country, but it's a continent.
At the peak of his fame, he was unavoidable. Born to a large family in the 70s, Dane described himself as someone who was introverted and shy, even suffering from social anxiety at an early age. However, he was at home entertainment, putting on his mother's wigs and dancing to entertain his siblings. It took him a while for him to be comfortable enough to let that passion manifest, though, as he only began discovering an interest in doing comedy when he took theater in high school. Quickly, this developed into a professional pursuit. He started working at former comedy clubs when he was just 18 years old. Throughout the 90s, he moved
now he's mobbing. Maui.
Los Angeles to try his hand at comedy, but it took until 1998 for him to
My sweetheart.
in the Comedy Central show
Come on.
Blend, which eventually became the aforementioned
What the
Live at
Nope.
Gotham. A few more years went by, during which Dane was relegated to a successful
You slag.
name that occasionally showed up in Comedy Central's roster. That is until 2003, when he signed a contract with Comedy Central Records to release his first comedy album, Harmful If Swallowed. While it wasn't insignificant by any means, given that the album eventually sold a total of 1,400,000 copies in the United States, it didn't get established as the extremely successful comedian he would become. It was only 2 years later, when his second album, Retaliation, was released, that Dane was really making rounds. The album debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200, a feat which hadn't been achieved since 1978 by Steve Martin's A Wild and Crazy Guy. The record went gold within a week of its release, platinum in the same year, and double platinum 2 years later. It's weird to think that comedy albums used to go platinum, but I guess those were different times. As signified by this insanely 2000s infused cover art, made by Dane himself, by the way.
No!
So boss mode. It's safe to say this little amazing celebrity
God damn it.
one of the most illustrious men to get their hands on. From the MTV
Not the melon.
to the TD Garden,
What the fuck is that?
his first HBO special, titled Vicious Circle. Retaliation was also the beginning of another trend in Dane's career, his tendency to maximize the sheer volume of material he performs, with the album's duration totaling almost 2 hours. Later on, he and Dave Chappelle would go on to compete for the Laugh Factory's endurance record, culminating in Dane performing for a whopping 7 hours. I don't know about you, but I doubt there's no one funny enough on planet Earth to merit you listening to their stand-up for 7 hours straight, but apparently Dane succeeded. Dane instantly tried to branch off from stand-up and try his hand at conventional media. While his first attempt at it, a sitcom TV show called Cooked, didn't get picked up. Just a year later, he starred as the lead role in the movie Employee of the Month, which solidified him as a competent actor. The film made more than double its budget, which isn't bad, especially for a comedy movie. Just a year later, Dane once again was a lead actor in what was probably the biggest film of his entire career, Good Luck Chuck. And though it grossed a total of $35 million in the US and another 24 worldwide, the movie was relentlessly panned by critics who saw the movie as an extension of his comedy career, meaning they called him unfunny and try hard. The disparity between his success and the perceived quality of his work just kept on growing, no matter what direction he went in. It's worth noting that his move into the film industry didn't negatively affect his career as a performing comic, since he was also regularly doing massive month-long tours in colleges throughout America. Another impressive feat of his was selling out the Madison Square Garden, which had only been accomplished once before in 1990. Unsurprisingly, he was also netting all kinds of awards and nominations for his work as a comic. However, it was becoming noticeable that his persona as a comic was highly reflective of who he was in general. In interviews he gave, he often answered questions in a clever, even arrogant way, as if he was still in character, which many felt was forced. People also found it obnoxious how often he would blast right through the allotted time of his shows, giving signals for him to come off the stage so that the other comics could perform. Perhaps most importantly, his astronomical rise to fame was met with utter confusion from many people who didn't find him funny, including some other comedians. One common observation in regards to how discrepant Dane Cook's success was compared to his onstage material was that his success was due to being well marketed, not necessarily because of his talent as a comedian.
Oh yeah, did I mention my movie?
What am I even listening to? Oh, I'm crucifying again.
We played some more Gartic Phone, a game where you're given horrible prompts and then you have to draw an even more horrible picture. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe and click on the funny little card at the end of the video for more. Alright, and we're locked in. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Oh, you maxing her?
Holy shit.
Oh my god, it's so loud! Oh my god.
Yeah, Lovecraft, Sex Demon, Pharmacy.
I think this is the missing piece one, so we just get to start off with something.
Does this have to be like PG-13?
Slut.
So yeah.
Just try and make it viewable, maybe.
Why is that always his question?
It's actually really funny. That happens almost every time that somebody asks.
This is like PG? No, I actually don't want to make one.
Fruit Loops? You don't like Fruit Loops? I don't know if I'm gonna do it on the road.
Why did I do that?
Stains.
What you mean?
I'm making up for Liam.
How do you think we got mold on the freaking carpet we normally had? Because I always put liquid on it.
Mold on the car?
On the freaking car we used to have before we got rid of under the foundation. Mm-hmm. Damn! Send me good, asshat. Fuck. Can't kill him. Revive him. Eh. Nope. Kill that little bitch, goddamn.
It's abscess, I think that's what's actually. I had to throw in something extra stupid.
Pete.
Oh, I wonder what this could be.
What the fuck?
What? There's just one arrow! What the fuck am I supposed to do?
Really went out looking for cars.
Oh, God.
Beautiful.
It's
Fantastic.
like shit you see in like Garden of Fan.
This is Joker Josh. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, because the knife showed up? Look at
It is.
Oh, I thought the top right image was like the fucking reference image. I thought that's what it was supposed to become.
So we went from whatever the fuck Joker's is to pure Among Us.
Cute kawaii Peter Among Us.
I had no idea how that works. That makes sense.
Okay, yeah, this is Goku. Yeah, Goku.
Stop and Ravana.
Kirby, Goku's
What?
face disappeared for me completely.
Yeah. Okay.
Huh? Wait, yeah, that's what's confusing to me. There was like, I think it like erases parts that you've drawn before.
Oh, okay.
Oh wait, I think I get it. I think like, okay, so whatever the first person draws is given to the next person, but then whatever that second person draws, like, the rest of it disappears. Yeah, see? The first, whatever the first person drew disappeared.
Oh. Just came off.
I get it now. It all makes sense to me. I can see the order.
Okay.
I do this like
Yes,
and
I
Wait,
turned it
what?
into Goku.
You do that? Wait, there's no way you drew that.
I did. Ah, you made it was.
Yeah.
Nano Harada.
It is very. Oh my
Yes.
god! It like started with a seizure. What the hell?
I'm just saying because I think we are on the same wavelength.
Kissers, that's what I expected to see.
The thumbnail.
Because I drew this.
Yeah, I did not
How,
know this one.
how did we draw the same thing?
You can't just
What you get, you big bitch? Ah, Peter.
Ryan.
Zenyatta. You're the ball man, you fucking trash outlet. I meant to do.
Stewie into 11. You,
That's not good.
A what?
I think that's a little tactic wrong yet.
Or duoing.
No,
I
I'm
don't know
dead.
if I spelled my word right.
Well, no.
What does this mean? You guys can't just keep writing stuff.
Right.
It's Leo. Holy shit, man.
This is like competitive.
Competitive garden club. We're in the ranks line right now. What the fuck is going on?
Name one word.
Oba.
Yay! No. Oh no! Your bucket is the black color. Oh no! It's a mistake.
This is gonna be organized too, isn't it? God damn it.
Fuck you.
Okay, and we're gonna add 2 rays every round to the
So
sun.
we're gonna make the
Flex.
You have trouble figuring out a background color?
Yeah, I can see that.
No one finished the sun rays.
It regressed back to 2!
The banana he grew.
Goku drop kicking steel.
It was pretty funny when I read it out.
Well, let's see.
There we go.
Oh, why you
Wait,
always
I
got
didn't
gun?
read any of the prompts.
Gun is too shit.
That's good.